Part 22, The Living Paradox, Specific Phenomena and the Lessons They Impart. Among the beings who dwell beyond space-time, paradox is not only a philosophical ideal, but a tangible force that shapes their very presence and actions. Their existence and teachings manifest through specific paradoxical phenomena, living riddles that challenge ordinary perception and serve as gateways to deeper understanding. These phenomena, far from being mere curiosities, are essential tools and experiences in their evolution, revealing layers of reality inaccessible through conventional logic. One such phenomenon is the simultaneity of opposites. These beings embody states that to us seem mutually exclusive. They are at once singular and plural, localized and diffuse, eternal and transient. Imagine a form that simultaneously exists as a point of consciousness and an expansive field of awareness. A being whose self is both an individual flame and the entire constellation. This paradox teaches that identity is not fixed but fluid, a geometric pattern shifting across nested realities. Those who encounter or learn from such entities must relinquish the urge to categorize or define, instead embracing the dynamic flux of being itself. Closely related is the phenomenon of temporal duality, where cause and effect blur into a loop of mutual influence. These beings can act from futures that have not yet occurred or receive impressions from timelines that diverge from our own. To them, time is not a line but a woven fabric of possibilities, each strand influencing the others in a complex dance. This teaches that linear causality is a limited viewpoint, and true mastery requires perceiving and participating in the whole temporal tapestry. Humans who glimpse this paradox often experience visions or insights that defy chronological logic, challenging their very sense of reality. Another profound paradox is presence and absence. These beings can manifest influence without overt presence. Their effects ripple through reality like shadows cast by invisible light. This teaches the value of subtlety and the power of potential rather than force. It is an ethical lesson in restraint. True power lies not in domination, but in the ability to shape outcomes through minimal, precise interventions that respect the autonomy of other beings and realities. They also embody the paradox of knowing and unknowing. Their wisdom embraces the limits of knowledge, understanding that some truths are best approached through mystery and paradox rather than explicit articulation. This humility is not ignorance, but a profound recognition that reality transcends conceptual grasp. They teach initiates to balance rigorous inquiry with surrender, to hold questions open and resist premature closure. Finally, there is the paradox of creation through destruction. These beings understand that evolution often requires the dissolution of old forms to birth new ones, not as violent rupture, but as a necessary transformative cycle encoded in the geometry of existence. This manifests in practices that simultaneously dismantle and renew nested realities, a sacred destruction that clears the way for greater coherence and complexity. To engage with these paradoxical phenomena is to step beyond the familiar and enter a realm where logic bends and intuition expands. Their teachings are invitations to embrace ambiguity, to dwell in tension without fear, and to recognize that reality's deepest truths are often those that defy simple explanation. Through these living paradoxes, beings beyond space-time guide evolution, not by providing answers, but by awakening the capacity to dance with the unknown. Part 23, Approaching the Paradox. How humans might responsibly engage with the living contradictions beyond space-time. To stand before the paradoxical phenomena embodied by beings beyond space-time is to confront the limits of ordinary perception and thought. Their paradoxes are not puzzles to be solved by intellect alone, but profound invitations to expand consciousness and cultivate new modes of knowing. For humans, bound by linear time, symbolic language, and dualistic frameworks, engagement with these living contradictions demands both caution and courage, humility and resolve. First and foremost, responsible approach requires acknowledging our current boundaries. The human mind is deeply conditioned to seek certainty, to categorize experience into neat compartments. Paradox, by its nature, resists such reduction. Attempting to force these phenomena into existing conceptual boxes risks distorting or missing their deeper meaning. Thus, an initial step is cultivating a posture of openness and receptive ambiguity, learning to hold contradictions without rush to closure or judgment. Practices that facilitate this posture often involve embodied awareness and expanded states of consciousness. Meditation techniques that focus on the dissolution of the ego's grasp, sensory deprivation that softens the habitual filters of perception, and careful modulation of attention towards geometric and vibrational patterns are tools that prepare the mind to encounter paradox without overwhelm. Such practices also strengthen what might be called the paradox tolerance, the capacity to dwell comfortably within uncertainty and apparent contradiction. Ethically, humans must approach with respect for the autonomy and complexity of the phenomena. Just as the beings beyond space-time practice restraint to avoid overwhelming developing realities, human seekers must resist the urge to impose interpretations prematurely or to use paradoxical insights for control or manipulation. The goal is not mastery over paradox, but collaboration with it, learning to flow with its currents rather than forcing direction. Integration of paradox into human life requires a gradual unfolding. Initial experiences may be disorienting or fragmentary, yet with ongoing practice and reflection, these paradoxes can become sources of profound insight and transformation. They can expand cognition beyond binary thinking, develop empathy for complexity, and open pathways toward perceiving nested realities and multidimensional causality. To aid this integration, it is vital to cultivate communities of shared inquiry, spaces where paradox can be held collectively, where dialogue acknowledges uncertainty and honors multiplicity of perspectives. Such communities become living mirrors for the paradox itself, embodying its tensions and harmonies, and providing support for the often challenging inner work required. Finally, humans must remain aware that engagement with paradox is not an end in itself, but a means toward a deeper attunement with the geometry of existence. The beings beyond space-time do not simply reveal secrets. They offer a living template for evolving consciousness, an ethic of humility, a practice of balance, and an invitation to dance with the unknown. By cultivating patience, reverence, and disciplined inquiry, humans may gradually learn to perceive and participate in the paradoxical rhythms that shape reality beyond the veil, thus opening a doorway to new forms of understanding and co-creation with the cosmos. Part 24. The Paradox Embodied. Specific phenomena and the challenge of understanding beyond the human mind. In the realms beyond space-time, paradox is not an anomaly, but the essential form of existence itself. The beings who inhabit these dimensions do not merely contemplate paradox. They live it as a fundamental mode of being and knowing. Their nature and actions manifest through paradoxical phenomena that confound ordinary human cognition, exposing the limits of our brain's capacity to grasp the full scope of reality. One primary phenomenon is what might be termed simultaneous contradiction. These beings exist in states that, by human logic, cannot coexist. They are at once singular and multiple, present and absent, eternal and momentary. They may occupy a point in space-time while simultaneously diffusing across infinite dimensions. This paradox is not a flaw but a feature, a mode of existence where binary opposites fuse without collapse, creating a stable tension that sustains higher-order realities. For humans, this defies the law of non-contradiction ingrained in classical logic, which insists that something cannot be both A and not A simultaneously. Yet, beyond space-time, this law is subsumed into a more complex order, where contradiction is a signpost to deeper truths. Another profound phenomenon is non-sequential temporality. To these beings, time is not linear or even cyclical in the way humans experience it. It is a multidimensional field where past, present, and future interlace and influence each other in a non-hierarchical web. Their actions can ripple backward and forward, affecting changes in events that for us remain fixed points. The paradox here challenges human notions of causality and sequence. Our brains are wired to perceive cause before effect, yet these beings operate within a temporal fabric that is fluid, where causality is contextual and relational rather than absolute. A further paradox is presence-absence coherence. These entities can exert influence or convey meaning without being perceptibly there. Their presence is a field effect, an informational resonance rather than a localized form. This paradox confronts human reliance on sensory data as proof of existence and challenges the assumption that physical presence equates to causal power. Understanding such influence requires modes of perception and cognition that transcend sensory input and linear reasoning. Closely related is the known-unknown paradox. The beings embrace knowledge while simultaneously dwelling in the acceptance of profound mystery. They recognize that some truths cannot be encapsulated by language, symbols, or conceptual thought. This paradox invites a mode of understanding that is non-discursive and also non-symbolic, relying instead on direct experiential insight or a form of tacit knowing that evades articulation. Finally, the paradox of creation through deconstruction is central to their transformative processes. They engage in acts that simultaneously dissolve and instantiate realities, recognizing that creation is inseparable from destruction, and that progress often requires deconstruction of existing forms to birth new arrangements. This contradicts the human tendency to view destruction and creation as distinct or opposing forces. Part 25. Beyond the Brain: Why Paradoxes Resist Conventional Understanding. These paradoxes are not merely complex intellectual puzzles. They represent modes of reality and consciousness fundamentally inaccessible to ordinary human cognition. The human brain evolved primarily to navigate a three-dimensional world with linear time and causal regularity. It relies on binary logic, sequential processing, and symbolic abstraction, all tools that are ill-suited to grasp the fluid, multi-layered, and self-contradictory phenomena inhabited by beings beyond space-time. This means that attempting to understand these paradoxes through conventional reasoning is inherently limited. Instead, the encounter with paradox calls for a different kind of cognitive engagement, one that transcends linear thought and symbolic representation. It demands what might be termed a form of participatory apprehension, where understanding is not an act of analysis, but a process of attuning to contradictions, embracing ambiguity, and allowing meaning to arise from the interplay of opposing forces. Such understanding is not verbalizable. It often manifests as a shift in perception or a reconfiguration of intuitive faculties rather than as explicit knowledge. It may feel like stepping outside the bounds of normal cognition, where the mind suspends its usual demands for coherence and resolution, opening to the dynamic tension of coexistence without synthesis. In this sense, paradox functions as both a gatekeeper and a guide. It guards the deeper mysteries of existence from premature or simplistic grasp, ensuring that only those capable of holding contradiction without collapse may proceed further. At the same time, it guides the evolution of consciousness by stretching cognitive boundaries, fostering new modes of awareness better aligned with the multidimensional nature of reality. Part 26. Cultivating the Faculties for Paradoxical Understanding: A Path Beyond Conventional Cognition. To engage meaningfully with the paradoxes embodied by beings beyond space-time, humans must cultivate faculties that transcend the habitual patterns of thought and perception. Our brains, finely tuned to a linear, causal, and binary world, require deliberate training and transformation to begin apprehending realities where contradictions coexist without dissolution and time folds upon itself. The first step is developing what might be called cognitive elasticity, the capacity to hold contradictory information simultaneously without forcing premature resolution. This involves practices that weaken the mind's compulsive drive toward closure and certainty. Disciplines such as dialectical reasoning, paradoxical inquiry, and exposure to ambiguous stimuli can foster this elasticity, training the brain to become comfortable with uncertainty and tension rather than anxious or dismissive. Simultaneously, humans must expand their temporal sensitivity, the ability to perceive and operate within a non-linear framework of time. Techniques that emphasize present moment awareness while allowing subtle reverberations of past and future to arise can cultivate this. Rhythm-based practices, such as controlled breathwork or patterned movement, may attune practitioners to the multi-layered texture of time beyond linear sequencing, enabling glimpses of temporal interlacing where cause and effect intertwine. Developing sensory and cognitive attenuation is also essential, since beings beyond space-time often manifest through presence-absence coherence, fields of influence imperceptible to ordinary senses. Humans need to refine capacities for subtle perception. This might involve practices that quiet sensory noise and habitual conceptualization, such as focused sensory withdrawal or immersive attentional training, allowing the emergence of non-local impressions and intuitive insights. Importantly, cultivating non-discursive knowing is crucial. Since many paradoxes evade symbolic language and logical analysis, humans must develop modes of understanding that operate beyond words, through direct experiential apprehension. This might be nurtured by engaging with complex art forms, abstract geometry, or non-linear narrative structures that invite the mind to transcend narrative logic and inhabit symbolic spaces where meaning is felt rather than parsed. Equally vital is the development of ethical attunement to paradox. Encountering paradox requires not only cognitive shifts but also a moral stance, respect for ambiguity, restraint in interpretation, and humility before mystery. This ethical posture guards against intellectual arrogance or premature claims of mastery, fostering an openness to ongoing learning and transformation. Together, these faculties form an integrated matrix: cognitive flexibility, temporal attunement, subtle perception, non-discursive insight, and ethical humility that enables a new kind of human engagement with the living paradoxes beyond space-time. This is not a mastery to be rushed, but a gradual unfolding, an expansion of human potential toward modes of awareness compatible with the multidimensional and self-contradictory nature of deeper reality. Through sustained practice, communities of inquiry, and disciplined cultivation, humans may begin to cross the threshold into these paradoxical domains, not by conquering their mysteries with intellect alone, but by becoming participants in the dynamic dance of contradiction that shapes existence beyond our familiar horizon. Part 27, The Threshold of Knowing, an ongoing treaty with mystery. This codex does not speak as a herald of final truths, nor does it offer a sealed map to the territories beyond comprehension. Instead, it stands as a threshold, a liminal archway carved in shadow and light, inviting the seeker not to possession, but to participation. The knowledge here is not a fortress to be conquered, but a living current in which the boundaries of mind, time, and being dissolve and reform endlessly. To walk through this threshold is to enter a treaty with the unknown, a silent agreement that the journey itself is the teacher, and that the paths beyond will forever resist the iron grip of certainty. Language, forged in the fire of linear thought and sensory limitation, falters in the face of these realms. Words here are vessels, fragile and partial, bearing echoes rather than anchors. They gesture toward horizons that recede with each step forward. Within this fractal dance of knowing and unknowing lies the essential humility of the advanced seeker, a readiness to dwell in tension without demand for resolution, to hold contradiction not as a problem, but as a primal force from which new patterns emerge. This posture is not weakness but strength, an echo of the paradox itself, embodied and lived. Ethics in this domain are not codified precepts, but the subtle rhythms of responsibility that arise when one recognizes that knowing is not solitary, but relational. Every glimpse beyond the veil is intertwined with the worlds left behind. To gaze into the deeper weave is to carry the weight of that gaze. Restraint, respect, and discernment are the silent guardians at the gates of paradox, ensuring that revelation does not unravel the fragile tapestries of life. The path of paradox is neither pathless nor solitary. It is trod in concert, across generations, disciplines, and modes of perception, woven by voices that sing in discord and harmony alike. This communal weaving is the fire of transformation, where fragmented knowledge converges into patterns of emergent wisdom. Thus, the Codex serves less as a conclusion and more as an opening, a summons to the slow, deliberate unfolding of faculties not yet fully born within the human frame. It invites the reader to dwell with questions that have no easy answers, to embrace the space where knowing and mystery entwine, and to prepare for encounters that will reshape the contours of mind and world. In this, the work acknowledges itself as a fragment, a mirror catching the faint light of realities still beyond our grasp. It is a call to readiness, a meditation on patience, and above all, a recognition that the deepest truths are not those that fix the gaze, but those that dissolve it, ushering us into the infinite dance of becoming. Epilogue, the unfolding horizon. The pages that precede this moment are but whispers cast upon the vast winds of a cosmos far older and more intricate than our minds have yet dared to reckon. This codex does not claim mastery over the labyrinth of existence, nor does it offer a final key to the doors beyond the veil. Instead, it marks a beginning, a quiet invitation to lean into the disquiet of unknowing, to embrace the gravity of paradox not as an obstacle but as the very forge of insight. To journey with these words is to acknowledge the limits woven into our cognition, the boundaries shaped by time, space, and the architecture of thought itself. Yet beyond these boundaries, hinted at by geometry, vibration, and the shimmering interplay of forces unseen, lies a domain where knowing and unknowing intertwine as inseparable companions. This domain demands more than intellect. It asks for a kind of readiness, an openness to the fractures in certainty, the fissures in logic, and the silence that blooms between thought and perception. Here, to know is to be undone and remade, to dwell in the fertile tension of contradiction without retreat or false resolution. Those who have traveled these depths, beings whose science and consciousness unfold beyond the constraints of space-time, engage paradox not as riddle or illusion, but as a foundational principle. Their existence is woven through with paradoxical patterns, not because they reject order, but because their order transcends our dichotomies and linear frames. For us, still bound by the confines of evolving cognition, the Codex stands as both mirror and map, reflecting where we are and pointing toward where we may become. The path ahead is neither straight nor certain. It spirals through nested realities and shifting geometries, demanding patience, humility, and the courage to dwell within mystery. This work does not close the book on possibility. It opens a space for the slow emergence of faculties and understandings yet unformed. It calls on the future, on minds not yet born and cultures not yet imagined, to take up the mantle of inquiry with care and resolve. In the vast theater of existence, the Codex is a single, shimmering thread. Yet from such threads, tapestries grow, ever expanding, ever deepening, inviting all who listen to step into the unfolding horizon and become, at once, seekers and keepers of the paradox, the promise of the singular path. In a world where shared understanding remains fragile, and the threads of trust between people are often weak or broken, the work of transformation rests heavily on the individual. This is no lament, but an acknowledgement of the landscape, one in which each mind and heart must wrestle with the depths of paradox largely alone. The Codex sees this solitude not as punishment, but as the ground where human potential takes root and grows. The abilities required to move beyond ordinary perception, the skill to hold contradiction without collapse, to sense time as layered and fluid, to engage with realities that escape linear thought, do not arrive fully formed. They emerge slowly, through steady practice with uncertainty, and through persistent examination of the fractures within thought and experience that most avoid or deny. Alone, the seeker learns to live within tension, to hold the pull of opposing forces without falling into despair or settling for simple answers. This path calls for endurance, patience, and a readiness to remain in the space between understanding and confusion, where new insight begins to take shape. It is here, in the quiet work of sustained attention and willingness, that the structure of expanded awareness begins to form. While the fabric of society may still be weaving itself anew, each individual who nurtures these capacities becomes a point of change, a living center of possibility whose subtle effect spreads beyond the self. The transformation of many depends on the careful work of the one. This is not a journey of isolation, but a solitary passage toward horizons still out of view, where the limits of human knowing may one day be redrawn. The Codex offers no guarantees, only a clear challenge: to take responsibility for the growth of one's own awareness, to face the paradoxes inside and outside with honesty and rigor, and to prepare for a future shaped by the slow unfolding of inner change. Too often, progress halts at the boundaries of what is known and comfortable, as the mind clings to familiar assumptions and rigid frameworks that offer a false security. Yet the nature of what lies beyond, if there is indeed a beyond, cannot be fully grasped by these same structures. To move forward, we must embrace an openness to paradox, to realities folded within layers unseen, and to the limits inherent in language itself. This openness does not mean abandoning reason. but rather extending its reach into territories where certainty dissolves and where contradiction is not failure but foundation. In learning to dwell within uncertainty without fear, the mind becomes a vessel for new modes of perception, ones that do not demand immediate resolution but allow insight to arise in the tension of opposites. Such a shift invites a transformation not only in how we understand the world, but in how we live within it. It calls for courage to unsettle habitual thought, to hold complexity without retreat, and to recognize that true knowing may always carry the shadow of unknowing. This is the beginning of a different journey, a path that winds beyond linear time and fixed categories, toward a horizon where understanding is woven through paradox and layered dimensions. Progress here is not measured by conquest or accumulation, but by the readiness to engage with the unknown on its own terms, and to let the very act of questioning become a form of knowing.